Thanks, Marty. It's great to be with you at the Grove again, even though it is now is virtually. So I think I can remember standing there at the school and looking out and seeing all your faces. So I'll just try and remember what you look like as we share the word this morning. As probably many of you know, and Marty said, I'm one of the lecturers at Malyon College, which is your Baptist Theological College. A few people have been asking, what are we doing? Well, we've stopped all lectures, but we're thanking God that we were already fairly well prepared for delivering content online. Already over half of our students were studying online, and so it's just been a matter of moving the other students who used to come to lectures into our online offerings, and that's gone fairly seamlessly, and lecturers and students alike are reporting that through the technologies we've got, that we've been able to provide a really good learning experience for them. So that's one of the several emerging praise points that are coming through the lockdown requirements in response to the coronavirus, and one of them is that theological education is continuing to flourish in new ways in this current environment. What you might not know is that at the beginning of this year I was appointed the regional minister for the Metro Central region of Queensland Baptists, which is 22 churches, including the Grove. And you might say, well, we're not very Metro Central. Well, you're right on the northwestern edge of my area, but thankfully you guys are in the Grove area and in the Metro Central area. And one of the other exciting things that's happening is the great sense of collaboration that is developing amongst all Queensland Baptist churches, but particularly in this Metro Central area. A lot of exchanging of ideas and how you're going to do that, and this went well and this didn't go well, and all those sorts of things. So certainly as our churches adapt to this new world, we're going to be making good decisions, and we're going to be making mistakes, and things are going to work and things are not going to work. But as our Prime Minister has said, we're all in this together, and we're all in it together with God, so we can thank Him for our knowledge that we have of Him as we go through this. In October 2001, a very unique meteorological event occurred off the east coast of the United States, down the south near Florida. A cyclone Grace, or as they call it in the Northern Hemisphere, Hurricane Grace, established and became a strong cyclone, and it began to move northwards as cyclones or hurricanes. A pressure trough also began to develop, and in an amazing meteorological coincidence, it began to move south. And so meteorologists began to get very excited as these two huge weather events began to move towards each other. At about 2 weeks earlier than that, though, in a fishing port on the west coast or east coast of the United States, a bluefin fishing trawler captained by Billy Tyner called the Eleanor Gay was coming into port with another empty load of fish, another failed fishing trip out into the Atlantic, and Billy Tyner and the crew took the Andrea Gale was the name of the boat, by the way. Andrea Gale took the risky decision to head back out to sea to try and get a catch before the fishing season closed. And they went to their usual spot, couldn't get any fish. They made another decision to go even further out into the Atlantic, hoping to catch a good catch of bluefin tuna. They were excited when, way out, they hit a big school and brought on board a huge catch, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tuna. But about the middle of their catch, the ice machine on their ageing trawler broke down, and all of a sudden they were risking having to throw all of this fish they'd caught overboard unless they could get back to port before it started to go off. And they were at that point watching this meteorological event beginning to unfold, and they decided, after much toing and froing, to try and race back to port so that they could offload their fish before it went off and they'd have to toss them all overboard. Unfortunately for the Andrea Gale, they got caught in the middle of the storm and were never heard of again. The sad events of this tragedy were recorded in a movie called The Perfect Storm, starring that unfortunately, unhappily looking guy, ugly guy. What's his? George Clooney. Yeah. It's that guy. But anyway, he started. And you might have seen it. And they sort of suggest what might have happened to the crew. It was a perfect storm in two senses. It was a perfect storm in a meteorological sense, in a weather sense, having this great hurricane moving up from the south and this great cold front moving down from the north. And it created apparently waves 25 to 30 metres in height, quite staggering. It was a meteorological storm, but it was also a storm of events for the Andrea Gale. Their decision to go out again when most of the boats were staying at home, their decision to go out further than they would normally go, the great big catch, the broken ice machine, the decision to try and race the weather and get to port. And so it was a perfect storm both meteorologically but also a perfect storm of events. And sometimes in our lives we get these perfect storms. I mean, most of us have challenges in our lives, the things we struggle with from day to day. But every now and then we sort of get this perfect storm where more than one thing's come at us. It's okay to have a big project at work, but then when you get a sick child as well, that sort of becomes a perfect storm. It's okay to have to lose your job or to get hours cut back. It's another thing to be in an economic downturn when that happens. You're not going to be able to replace those hours. And I think in Australia we're in the middle of a perfect storm. Even before the coronavirus, we'd had the bushfires and all of the suffering and the challenges that had come with the bushfires. And then on top of that, we all of a sudden we had the Hannah Clark murder-suicide, which I think really cut to the heart of our nation emotionally, and as we grieved and were horrified at what happened. And now, of course, we've got the coronavirus, and it's a perfect storm in itself, isn't it? Because it's both a health issue for us. So, some of us are concerned about our own health. Some of us are concerned about the health of our elderly relatives. So there's the health concern, and then there's also the economic concern. Already, some of us have had work cutbacks or lost jobs altogether. Already, we've got deep economic concerns about what's going to happen to our businesses and our workplaces into the future. And for many of us, we'll feel as though we are in the middle of a perfect storm. There's a perfect storm recorded in the Bible. In Acts chapter 27, Paul, on his journey to Rome, gets caught in a perfect storm. And it's quite a breathtaking narrative in here. The historians say this is probably the greatest maritime disaster narrative in ancient literature. It's sort of the story of the Titanic for ancient readers. And Luke is, of course, a master storyteller, and in the book of Acts he often sort of goes off on tangents almost to let loose his desire to tell a good story, and there is no better story than the one he records here in Acts chapter 27. So hopefully you've got your Bible there, or you've got your device that you can turn to in your Bibles. But I'll read it together with you now. Acts chapter 27, verses 13 to 26. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. That word northeaster is two Greek words joined together, describing two meteorological events. It's two weather events coming together to create this blustery, dangerous weather that Paul's ship gets caught up in. Verse 15, the ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. In those days they did it around, and they're frightened it's either going to get ripped off and swept away, or it's going to crash into the ship itself. So they, at great risk and energy, they pull it on board, tie it down to make it safe. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. The ship is getting battered so much that it's coming apart. The beams, the bits of timber are beginning to separate. The water's flooding in through the joints. So they run ropes underneath it and sort of tie a bow around it to try and hold this boat together as it's getting buffeted by this incredibly wild storm. Because they were afraid we would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, which was a famous place for shipwrecks. They lowered the sea anchor to slow the boat down and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm, verse 18, that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. This is a sign of how serious it was, that the cargo, they don't own the cargo. It's this very valuable stock, possessions that they're carting, shipping for somebody else. And it's getting so desperate that they're throwing, hundreds of thousands of dollars or something like that of equipment overboard, or of stock overboard in an attempt to keep the ship afloat. On verse 19, on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard. The tackle is the stuff that puts the sails up and controls the direction and the operations of the ship. That's how desperate things are. They're thinking, this is life and death. We've just got to get rid of this stuff. Verse 20, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. We finally gave up all hope of being saved. That's Luke. That's Paul as members of the ship. It's just, we read in other parts, it's 14 days. They haven't seen the sun for 14 days. They've been blown along in this storm. I get seasick. 3 hours is enough for me to go, I wish I was dead. We've got no hope. Verse 21. After they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, "Men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete." Hearts that Paul had been shipwrecked 3 times already. He's not the sort of guy you want to go on a cruise with. He's got a bad track record, and he's Fair Havens. Now, I don't know about you, but Fair Havens, that sounds like a lovely place to spend the winter, doesn't it? And Paul, and I think he was probably lucky not to follow the sufferings of his predecessor Jonah, who got thrown overboard by the crew. I think Paul was very lucky not to go the same way. But anyway, they listen him out. They urge you to keep up your courage. I urge you. Don't just, he's not just saying, now come on, cheer up. Automatically the crew would have said, Paul, where are you getting that from? Look at our circumstances. Look how desperate and bad things are. How can you have such confidence? He goes on in verse 23 to explain. Last night, an trial before Caesar, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you, just as he told me. Keep up your courage. Paul was afraid. Everybody on that boat was afraid. Everyone in Australia, everybody in the world probably, are having moments at least of being afraid. I don't know about you, but generally I'm okay. But every now and then something happens, or you see something on TV and there's just that little twinge of anxiety, and it is, keep up your courage. Keep up your courage. Be courageous. Don't give in to fear. Why not? Well, the same things that Paul talks about apply to us as well. He says, last night an angel of the Lord, of whom I belong and whom I serve, appeared to me. Angels occur all over the place in the book of Acts. In chapter 5, all of the apostles are imprisoned, and an angel of the Lord comes and rescues them from prison. In Acts chapter 12, Peter is in prison and chained between 2 guards. You might remember the story. An angel of the Lord comes and releases Peter and tells him to get up and leads him out of the jail. Later in the book of Acts, it is the angels who come to Paul and tell him to take the gospel to Rome. And they're all the way through. And based on that, most Christians throughout history in most parts of the world have been keenly aware of the presence of angels. And are aware that they're developed. No, it's not just something they made up. It's coming from the scriptures as they see the way the angels were ministering through this promise that his angels are ministering to us, and that we have unseen helpers at work in our lives. Billy Graham was a big believer in angels. He says, if you are a believer, expect powerful angels to accompany you in your life experiences, and let those events dramatically illustrate the friendly presence of the Holy One, as Daniel calls them. My most memorable encounter with an angel was many years ago now, just before I got married. So Lynette, my wife, was studying in Armidale, and I was teaching in a place called Cobar, which was 3 hours west of Dubbo in New South Wales, if you know that at all. And we were getting married on Easter Saturday, and so on Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m, I'm in the car racing out of Cobar, heading towards Armidale to catch up on my bride-to-be before the big event. And I was pretty keen to get to Armidale, I'll tell you. And I might have at times gone just slightly over the speed limit as I attempted to get to Armidale on Thursday night. So I was nearly there, and just coming out of Tamworth. It came around a curve in the road, again, slightly over the speed limit, possibly. And hopping across the road is a 2-metre red kangaroo. And I'd already had some close shaves with kangaroos, and as I sat there, I knew that I was going to hit it. It was going to be a fairly catastrophic collision for both the kangaroo and for me. And so I was actually bracing myself as I got close to this roo. As it went to go its next hop, which was going to take it directly into my path, it was like it hit a brick wall, an invisible wall, and it just stopped. And as the car went past, as my rear vision mirror ruffled the fur on its chest, I looked into the eyes of that kangaroo, and we had a moment. We looked deep into each other's souls and went, man, that was close. And I sped on past that kangaroo. At that moment, on my Kenwood cassette player, I had one of my favourite cassettes playing. And the lyrics of the song go, God only knows the way my life has been endangered just today. A reckless car ran out of gas before it came my way. Near misses all around me, accidents unseen. I'll never see with human eyes the unseen hands that guide me home. He's got his angels watching over me everywhere I go. Angels watching over me. And you've got angels watching over you. They are your comforters in this time of the perfect storm. Paul says something else, though. He's saying that the angel came to me and is the angel of the God to whom I belong. This is the source of Paul's confidence, that he belongs to God. God owns him. This is one of the key metaphors through the world. It's the ownership is a key truth that the people who belong to God need to grasp a hold of. And so God is at pains in his word to use several metaphors to try and convince us of this truth. The first one is the metaphor of a shepherd, that in numerous places God identifies himself as a shepherd. Jesus identifies himself as the good shepherd who lays down his life for his sheep. In Australia, we don't tend to really grasp the power of this metaphor because our sheep farms are stations. They're huge. There's, and a farmer will own thousands, if not tens of thousands of sheep. And this idea that he would know them is sort of crazy. But of course, in the ancient world, in the world of Jesus and Paul, I name, and some of the more intelligent sheep would know the call of their shepherd and come to him. Second metaphor, it often comes in the Bible, is this idea of God's fatherhood. God owns his people. They belong to him the way that a child get an insight into this reality. I can remember that one powerful moment where I looked at one of my daughters and said to myself, I would die for her. I would do anything to protect this child. For a fairly selfish person, this was a life-changing moment. But that's only a glimpse of the passion that God has for us. I mean, I was a mediocre father, but God is the perfect father. And his love for you, his sense of ownership of you is perfect and complete. And he would do anything for you. In fact, he did. He went to the cross for us. Third metaphor of God's ownership of us belonging to God, is that he bought us. 1 Corinthians 6:20. You are not your own, you were bought at a price. God created us, so we belong to him in that sense. But he also bought us back from sin and death. And so we belong to him in that sense as well. There's the famous little story of a boy who assembled a toy boat and loved that boat and played with it often. But one day he put the boat in the ocean and the wind turned and it disappeared over the horizon. And he's heartbroken that he's lost his favourite boat. But of course, then one day he's walking down the main street, looks into the window of the cash converters, second-hand store, and there is his boat. And he goes in to the shopkeeper and says, look, that's my boat that I lost. And the shopkeeper, full of compassion, says, Sonny, you can buy it. As soon as you've got your money, you can buy your boat back. And so the story goes, the little boy goes home and he does tasks around the house and he scrimps and he saves and he goes back to the shop and it's sold. No, the boat is there. And he walks in, puts his money on the counter. And as he walks out of the shop, he's overheard to say to his boat, I own you twice. Once, because I made you, and twice, because I had to buy you back. And when God looks at you, he says, I own you twice. You're doubly loved. Once because I made you, and once because I brought you back. And Paul, as he says to the men on the ship, the God to whom I belong, he was carrying a depth of meaning and understanding and comfort and strength that only a Christian knows when they dwell upon the realities of God's ownership of us and that we belong to him. It goes further. It's not only the promise, this promise is coming from an angel of the God to whom I belong, it is also the God whom I serve. 2 years beforehand, God had said to Paul, you're going to be my witness in Rome. And I think at the time Paul would have gone, I can't see how that's going to possibly happen, but it had gradually over time unfolded that that's what was happening. And Paul was actually on his way to Rome when the shipwreck or the ship disaster occurred. And Paul, the angel, is reminding Paul as he talks with the angel, Paul is reminded of the fact that he's on a mission for God. And God is not going to let him die until he's fulfilled the mission that God has prepared for him. You see, there is no such thing as the premature death of a Christian. You will not die before you've fulfilled the mission that God has called you to. And if you are serving God and if you have a sense of call to something he's called you to do, you can have a greater degree of confidence that God is going to keep you alive until you fulfill the purposes he set out for you. And that you will not die until you've fulfilled all of the purposes that he set you before. Paul's message to his mates on the ship, and Paul's message to you this morning, God's message to you this morning is, keep up your courage. In the midst of those little moments of fear, those little moments of anxiety you get, be courageous. I urge you to be courageous. because you are surrounded by angels, because you belong to God. You're his. He's going to look after you. And you are his servant. And he's not going to call you home until he's finished everything that he has set out for you to do. I'm sure that the crew were all going, oh, thank heavens, Paul. Oh, thank you for the good news you brought us. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, we can relax now. Verse 26. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. We are going to have a shipwreck, guys. We're going to sink. We're going to end up in the ocean. We're going to end up nearly drowning. We're going to end up clambering and swimming and trying to hang on to bits of debris. And we're going to probably end up washed up, half dead on a beach somewhere. God's promises to us are not that you're never going to go through a perfect storm. There's nowhere, I can't see anywhere in the Bible where that promise is there. And God's promise to us is not even that we're not going to get shipwrecked. He doesn't say that. You may not, but he's not promising that you won't end up washed up on a beach somewhere. God's promise to you is, I'm with you. My angels are with you. You belong to me. You're my servant. I'm with you, no matter what happens in your life.